So this event, Whither Socialism, Mamdani and the Left, is organized by the Platypus Affiliated Society, which was established in December 2006 to organize reading groups, public fora, research, and journalism focused on the problems and tasks inherited from the old 1920s to 30s, new 1960s to 70s, and post-political 1980s to 90s left for the possibilities of emancipatory politics today. So first I'm going to read to you the panel description that we circulated to the panelists as well as via email to many of you. And then I'll introduce the panelists and they will give opening remarks followed by a short round of responses, and then we'll open it up for comments and questions from the audience. While Zohran Mamdani's surprise victory in the New York Democratic mayoral primary has been touted as an unprecedented achievement for the American left, it did not fall out of the proverbial coconut. Mamdani has approvingly cited the Whither Socialists of the 20th century, who came out of the Second International Socialist Party of America, as a model. Some on the left point to New Deal Republican Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia as an aspiration for leftist municipal politics. The YDSA has also been involved in electoral politics since at least the 1980s, and member David Dinkins was elected mayor of New York in 1990. What lessons can the left today take from these projects, and how ought they inform our approach to Mamdani? But perhaps it is not primarily a question of socialist municipal politics. Democratic Party strategists have certainly followed Mamdani's campaign closely, even as leftists across the U.S. and abroad have heralded it as the first stirrings of a new leftist politics. Is Mamdani's campaign an audition for the new Democratic Party anti-Trumpism? Ought we think of a Mamdani victory as an achievement unto itself, or rather would it pose new and potentially confounding questions for a politically constituted left? What would it mean for the left to remain politically activated under Mamdani and under Trump? Is Mamdani the alternative to fellow New Yorker and first president to hail from the city since Teddy Roosevelt, Donald Trump, the head of the new Trump resistance, or an attempt, self-conscious or not, to constitute the left wing of the new political order, which Trump has inaugurated? So we've asked our panelists to consider these questions. And we have three panelists joining us very kindly in person today, but also one virtually because he was not otherwise able to attend. So Professor Melvyn Dubofsky is joining us via the internet. Professor Dubofsky is a professor of history and sociology at Binghamton University. He has written extensively on the history of labor organizing in America. To my right is Mitchell Cohen, who is a professor of political science at the University of New York. No? Oh my goodness. That's what I thought too. I knew that. This is Ben's fault. This is Ben's fault. I was like, you don't work at CUNY. I don't remember that. Oh my goodness. That's when you failed me. Okay, Mitchell Cohen is the host of Pacifica Radio, right? Is that right?
I was the chair of WBAI Radio at one point, and part of Red Balloon Collective out at Stony Brook, many other direct action activists.
Yeah, I think that's a good biography. Let's go with that one. Okay. Sorry, we're student group in case you can't tell.
I used to get the other Mitchell Cohen's hate mail, and he used to get mine. He was a labor Zionist, not a anti-Zionist.
Oh, this should be like a play about this. Actually, I think it would make a good movie. Okay, and next to him we have Daniel Lazare, who is the author of several books, including The Frozen Republic, and a journalist who has contributed to many publications, too many to list. Some of them I'm not sure if I'm supposed to list anymore, but right now he writes for Permanent Revolution blog. And finally, at the end, we have Sebastian LM, who is a member of the Young Democratic Socialists of America and has been a volunteer for the Zohran Mamdani campaign, but he's also here just speaking on his own behalf today, not for the organizations of which he is a part. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to the panelists, and everyone will have up to 15 minutes to give their opening remarks, and we'll follow it by a short round of responses. And I'm also, Melvyn, I'm going to move the computer so you can see the other panelists. Hopefully that makes it a bit nicer.
Haven't seen you in 40 years. This is Mitchell Cohen from organizing farm workers up in Binghamton all those years ago. Nope.
The sound is not very good on this end, so I'm trying to help with the closed captions, which are also sort of distorted.
Oh no. Okay. We'll try, maybe while the other panelists are giving their opening remarks, but Natalie, you want to come and try and see if we can get the mic audio to be closer to what Professor Dubofsky is.
Yes, please. It's like the Gulf of Mexico between us.
Okay, yes, let's do it. If the people want to, then the Vox Populi Fox stage. Thank you very much. Professor, is it better if we're not using the microphone? Professor, is it better with the microphone or when the microphone is not on mute?
Why use a microphone?
It's about what we can hear.
What?
Oh, goodness. Okay, well, the powers that be don't want the Marxists to talk at New York University. We already knew that. Okay, let's start with the opening remarks from our in-person panelists, and then we'll invite Professor Dubofsky back. Mitchell, would you like to go first?
Okay. So I have a proposal for Platypus, which is right up Platypus's alley. How many people here are part of Platypus? Oh, only a couple, 3, 4. All right, maybe others would like to join in. I'm trying to propose a set of radical reading rooms that some groups set up around the country, or at least one, where people could come and sit and read, and they would contain books. Like I have all the, I'm going to die soon. I'm on my last legs. So are lots of other people here, and not the students, but these things happen, right? And we have all these books that we have accumulated since the 50s and 60s and 70s that nobody sort of has. And I want to donate them somewhere. I brought them to my library, and they said, "Oh, we don't take books." I go, "What? Your library, you don't take books?" So, and no, nobody reads books. Everybody reads on their phones. So that, if anybody's interested in that project or working on a project like that, because I talked to Rick Wolf, I talked to a bunch.
Okay.
I talked to a bunch of.
Oh my goodness. I'm sorry.
Of other people. It's going. Okay.
Is it good now?
Seems okay. Perfect. And I tried a number of other people, and people want to donate their books somewhere and keep their lives for the next generations. So anyway, if anybody's interested in that project, please, let's conspire. So I've been, people know the movie On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando and E.J. Cobb and all those. Some people, I'm not used to talking with people much younger than me. And On the Waterfront, Marlon Brando, the whole movie is a wonderful, great movie by Kazan, fighting his way through the union bureaucracies, fighting against corruption. And at the end, the last scene is the last scene after he's beaten up and he wins the moral victory. He's meets the capitalist in charge of the whole enterprise that on the docks, who's in charge of it all. And this whole thing ends with the capitalist going,
All right, back to work. And that was seen as a victory for Brando and for all the others. And it's shocking, actually. And I was wondering if that's the same thing that's going to happen with Zohran and other people, and other socialists or liberals or progressives, unless we attack the system as a whole in some way. And then we have to figure out how to do that, and which is the missing link, right? How to do that effectively. So Mamdani and DSA consider themselves part of the continuation of the Second International in the US and Europe in the early 20th century. Its most important feature was the support for war and World War I. That's how the Second International didn't end that way, but that was its most important thing. And then in September 1915 in Zimmerwald, Switzerland, Lenin and Trotsky and Rosa Luxemburg broke with imperialism and the so-called socialists all over Europe and condemned the war. And they said they refused to send working class people to kill others and to be killed by other working class people for the benefit of the owners of capital and the nation states they control. So that split apart the Second International and over that question, the question of war and imperialism. So my question, I have a number of questions, is that has DSA, which Mamdani says he's part of, as does AOC and others, has it broken from that history? Has it written anything on saying we reject that history? Or was it all just in the distant past and we can forget about it? And what role does that have on municipal elections like we're about to have? There have been many mayors elected to office as socialists, and most have done so on independent parties, the Farm Labor Party, the Socialist Party, etc. Not so much on the Democratic Party that Mamdani is running on. But some socialist parties in the US, believe it or not, supported the US bombing of Vietnam. What? How did that? They saw it as bringing civilization to what they thought of as the uncivilized heathen masses. It seems impossible today, right? But has DSA written about and broken with that legacy? Mamdani, I think, probably has. I'm hoping, as have most radical socialists today. But Mamdani's importance is his break with the Democratic Party hierarchy, especially, finally, over the question of Palestine and Israel. The Second International, though, always torpedoed within our socialist movements our challenges to the fascist state of Israel, and almost always provided cover that liberals, in the name of socialism, present as a rationalization for furthering capitalist exploitation and expropriation, a complete misreading of Marx. And even though they presented it as this is what Marx had said, Kolakowski and others, and this is just wrong. It's just totally wrong on every level, morally wrong as well as historically wrong. So in the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels did offer some general assertions about the role of conscious communists in assisting the revolutionary process. They were to represent the interests of the revolutionary movement as a whole, as opposed to its immediate trade, electoral, or national interests. They are to bring out the international dimension hidden in every local struggle. And they're to establish a political organization embodying the most advanced consciousness of the working class and not one separated from it. And yet, there's been something missing from the socialist movement in the United States. I'm going to ask you, we geared, most of us, I bet, I assume, are socialist, progressive activists. What we have been doing all these years has been trying to raise others' consciousness. trying to get them to say, yes, I'm a socialist, right? Get more people to agree. And then what? Let's suppose we have hundreds of thousands of people or millions of people who consider themselves socialists, consciousness. What do? How does it become socialism from that? And today, it's very strange. I'm going to divert a little bit. Can you tell me when I have like 5 minutes left?
Oh, you have plenty of time.
Oh, okay. That's such a good feeling. I have plenty of time. Back in Lenin's day, he was considered an anarchist by others in the Second International. Hard to believe today when there's a big fight between Leninism or different perspectives, Leninism and anarchism. Yet, it's hard to imagine that Lenin was actually considered an anarchist. And yet, most anarchists share certain key assumptions with Lenin about the role of revolutionary organization. Dan might take issue with this, I'm not sure. But maybe not. There's a positive, almost utopian assertion by Lenin and others that people can do something, anything, to change the circumstances of their lives and their conditions. Everything is not predetermined. A great deal concerns how they've organized themselves to bring about a socialist future. The Second International, for instance, moaned that conditions weren't right for a truly popular uprising against World War I. This when millions of people were being slaughtered throughout Europe. The Communist Party in France in '68 even sabotaged the wave of mass strikes and direct actions across the country under the pretext objective conditions are not ripe for socialism. As well, people were being murdered all over the place. How are they seeing that? So the question again is whether the working class itself was organized to dramatically change their situation. Almost always not by the Second International and other liberals and others from the state down. Who workers were left with their only option to lobby the state and through their unions lobby their employers for reforms within the overall capitalist structure, which will sabotage the capitalist structure will sabotage even those efforts, as we're seeing now with Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, minimum wage, etc. In the case of World War I, the Second International, hoping to share in the booty should their country win, endorsed the militarist acts of their ruling class while denouncing the carnage of others and providing the cannon fodder for the war, just as they do, and in every war from within the ranks of the workers. They stake their hopes for trade union victories for their workers and their unions on the defeat of other workers and other unions at home and abroad. In 1968, the official Communist Party again used the historical determinist argument, objective conditions aren't right for revolutionary socialism, to betray the aspirations and concrete actions of the working class, how to get rid of that and get out of that capitalist trap. So that's another of the questions. This is not a rhetorical question. How does electing a DSA member, an explicit continuator of the Second International, as he himself had said, move us toward socialism, especially since capitalism will do everything possible to set worker against worker and defund and destroy Mamdani's efforts. What differentiates Mamdani's program? What worker can disagree with the few things that he's proposed, as far as it goes, which is not very far at all? What's different from de Blasio or Dinkins or other liberals? And let's not forget that de Blasio was campaign coordinator 30 years ago for Hillary Clinton, who's portrayed as a leftist. And we could all laugh together. How does the election of an avowed socialist help to make that actually happen, the socialism actually happen? First, I have several. First is the contract. Mamdani and other socialists and our movements, more than one individual, has to allow the inclusion of environmental and policy demands in contract negotiations. We've limited to only bread and butter demands, wage demands, working condition demands, not making demands on the capitalists that we work for, not saying shut down the pollution of the Hudson River, that's a job of workers. So that has to become a condition, and it has to break with all of the existing capitalist contract, the social contract that allows for unions. Instead of shutting down production, which we do on the strikes, student strikes, as well as work, open it up to workers' control. Well, every issue must convey the organizational capacity to make it happen, and not just appeal to those in power to do it on our behalf. This would be a fundamental rewrite of the rules of trade unionism at the Second International, that the Second International always upheld. And they're not going to do that, right? They're going to try and bust up Mamdani and any socialist effort if they're sincere and real. So how to structure this? Can we use state power to fund and expand communes and collectives? This was Hugo Chavez's great contribution, as written about in last month's monthly review. There's a great articles on Hugo Chavez calling for the setting up of communes as part of the socialist structure and the transition to socialism. These differ from Nicaragua's and Cuba's small committees in every community, because those were mostly for distribution of goods, but not for production. And the system is already, we see that the system is already pitting workers in community gardens against workers in needing housing, against each other. Workers don't want to be poisoned, but they're willing to allow a certain amount of poisoning, not shutting down the corporations that are poisoning us, and so forth. Can these be instituted in New York City via executive or legislative decisions alone, even by a new and ostensibly socialist mayor? Mayors can do good things by being a socialist. The point is to organize the working class beyond where it is now and into communities as the basis for democratic control of the society. And what happens when the pharmaceutical industry, for instance, pulls out all the stops in mandating that workers allow themselves to be inoculated with an experimental drug or lose their jobs and be thrown out in the street? What will be the position of the new socialist mayor on that? We already know with Mamdani's stated positions. Same questions regarding ecological issues. The mayor will try to make decisions facing huge capitalist and market pressures. Can this even be done electorally without uprooting the entire capitalist system? And if so, how to go about doing that? Those are some unanswered questions, and socialism, they will move to crush socialism if Mamdani and the city of apparatus is not building those structural forms now. And then even deeper fascism will come and take us over. So that was my charge to Mamdani's regime or governance, whatever I like him. I like the things he's putting forth. They're nice, they're good. Who doesn't want to ride for free on a bus, as a worker? But really it has to go a lot deeper than that. And the structures have to be built that will defend socialist policies and programs against the capitalists who are trying to tear it down. Thank you.
I agreed with, I disagreed with much of what you said, but I did agree with a few things. And I'm very glad you brought up the question of what happened in 1914. I agree totally. That was an incredible betrayal of the working class movement when the Second International essentially caved in and supported. Each party supported its own country in the war, so that workers wound up slaughtering one another. Socialist workers.
But Dan, can you hold it a bit closer? People
Socialist
can't
workers
hear.
wound up slaughtering one another. So I'm glad you brought that up. But it's very interesting because these questions are never simple. For example, in 1914, a leader of the French Socialist Party said that if we hadn't voted for war credits, our own members would have lynched us in the streets because the war fever was running so high. Germany was attacking France, and their own members would have strung them up. And I still think they were wrong to cave into that pressure. But what I take from that is that there come times when you've got to do the unpopular thing. You've got to break with popular opinion, party opinion, the prevalent political opinion on the left, and you've got to sort of stand athwart it and challenge it. So that's brings me to Mamdani. Mamdani, there's been a lot of enthusiasm over his primary victory. People are very, very excited, and everybody is hailing it as the new dawn, a new era. Finally, Trump is getting his socialist resistance, and I am very skeptical. And the reason I'm skeptical.
We lost the mic. I'm sorry.
The reason I'm skeptical, is that I've seen this all before. I mean, just cast your mind back a decade and a half. I mean, what have we been through? 2011, Occupy Wall Street. 2016, Bernie Sanders. 2017, the Pussy Hat protests. Remember those in Washington in January? Remember? Were you old enough? Or?
Yeah, I know what those
Yeah,
are. I never wore one. Never.
Okay, and then the Me Too movement. 2018 saw the rise of the Squad. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, Rashid Tlaib, and 2020 saw the rise of BLM. And at each of these moments, there was this popular outpouring. Isn't it great? The revolution has arrived. Everyone's so enthusiastic. Let us just plunge into this latest struggle. And what has been the result? The result is we are, in the middle of the Trump era. Democracy is collapsing. The entire world, I mean, even from as far away as Nepal, is rushing to the right. People have lost faith in the very idea of democratic self-government, and they are looking to strongmen like Trump to sort of do their thinking for them. So all these protests that arouse such enthusiasm led to not very much, not very impressive results. And I'd also point out abroad, I mean, 2012 to 2015 saw the rise of Syriza in Greece, a coalition of left-wing parties that ended up collapsing when they authorized a referendum on the latest EU debt bailout package. The vote was 61 to 39 no. And the Syriza government then turned around and approved the package. So Syriza promptly collapsed. 2015 saw the rise of Podemos in Spain. They had 20.7% of the vote by 2015, which is pretty spectacular. They were the third largest party in the Spanish parliament. And they wound up collapsing. 2015 saw the rise of Jeremy Corbyn. And he wound up collapsing. In 2019, the Labour Party suffered its worst defeat since the 1930s, and Corbyn was forced to resign. Just now, the same time that leftists are waxing enthusiastic over Mamdani, there's Corbyn and Zahra Sultana, a left-wing member of parliament, are forming a new party, which is provisionally called Your Party. And when they announced the plans, they got 800 subscribers in a matter of 800,000 subscribers in a matter of days. So it shows this vast outpouring of enthusiasm and support, like we've seen repeatedly over the last 12 or 15 years. Well, now Your Party is falling apart because Jeremy Corbyn and Zahra Sultana are at loggerheads. They're feuding. They're each expelling the other from the party. The whole thing is falling apart. And I would point out that 2 weeks ago in London, Tommy Robinson, the head of the English Defence League, he's a football hooligan, and the term fascist is overused, especially with regard to Israel, by the way. And but Tommy Robinson looks like he is becoming the true article. Tommy Robinson organized a protest in Britain on September 13th, 2 Saturdays ago, that may have drawn, estimates go as high as 300,000 people. And some people say it's really 1 million people. There were 10,000 counter-protesters organized by Say No to Racism, a socialist workers' party creation. They had to be protected by the police. They were outnumbered 30 to 1. So Your Party, the new left-wing party, is dying a borning. The whole thing is dissolving in petty bickering because really their politics are totally fractured. And meanwhile, the radical right is putting together the biggest far-right demonstration in Britain since, I think, the 1930s. So it just goes to show, what the true picture is out there. So we have Mamdani now. Second, I'm sorry. I know it's my phone. So I was looking at some of Mamdani's election results. It's really fascinating. Among college-educated voters, Mamdani won 62-38. Among those without college education, Cuomo won 61-39. This perfectly, well, not perfectly, but very closely mirrors what happened in 2024 between Trump and Kamala Harris, where Trump won the vote of those who had less than 4 years college education, and Harris won those who were more educated, and that's widely seen as a stand-in for working on middle class. So what is Mamdani doing? He is replicating the same pattern we saw in 2024, which led to Trump, led to disaster. This kind of middle-class socialism, which winds up alienating the working class and driving the working class into the arms of the right. Now, Cuomo is not a rightist like Trump, but he's still somewhat to the right. So I think that's what's happening with Mamdani is much less impressive than what people are letting on. And that we see, rather than breaking up the old patterns, political patterns, what we're seeing is that he is in some ways reinforcing them. And he is appealing to the middle class. He's advancing a kind of a middle class semi-liberal, semi-quasi-socialism, and he's not winning over the workers. Now, what should Mamdani do? I mean, I presume he's going to win in November. I'm not positive, but I presume he will. It looks like he will. Even Trump says he probably will. So the question is, Mamdani's, he's going to, put in free buses. Is he going to open one city grocery store per borough? So somehow think that people will take long subway rides to do their shopping, which is ridiculous. And meanwhile, Trump is gearing up, is getting the bulldozers ready. Because as soon as Mamdani takes office, Trump will bulldoze through. He will love it. He will be able to to punish New York and punish Mamdani in a dozen different ways. So what is Mamdani doing to prevent that? Is he mobilizing the working class against that? He's not. He's meeting with Kathy Hochul. So it's just so completely underwhelming. It's so completely a continuation of these really impotent left liberal politics that we have seen in such abundance since the financial crisis in 2008, that I just think that it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to lead to more disappointment, and so that's basically what I'm here to say. I'm here to say that just as the French SP made a very bad mistake in 1914. I think that liberals, that leftists, socialists are making a very bad mistake if they suspend their judgment and flock uncritically to the Mamdani banner. That's it. Thank you.
Perfect. So I actually didn't know that we had 15 minutes to speak, but I wrote something out, so we're good. I unfortunately don't have it printed out or on my phone, so it's not gonna be as fabulous. If you guys wanna look at it, it's really cute. It's on the back of this, so it came out useful. That was a joke, guys, I swear. But yeah, so I wanna ask an opening question first, because I feel like this has been, given by the tilting of heads on the panel, mainly questions towards me. So I'll kind of break it down into like 10 and 5 minutes. I just wanna know in this room, how many people voted in the primary? Okay, good. I want to get a lay of the land of who I'm talking to. Because I think it's different based on both what type of ideological, I think I want to approach this in a way where, one, I'm talking about ideology, but two, I'm talking about the actual movement spaces and what organizing can mean, both within like Zohran, within like DSA, but also just in general and what this means probably for the state of the left when it comes to organizing. And I want to make this important note because I want to clarify that I became an organizer before I became a socialist. I became an organizer when I was 14. I'm from Harlem in the Bronx. And it was because of the material conditions, right? We're talking about the working class here abstractly, but we see that, at least for the policies that we want to talk about, and I'll get into a bit of the more historical understanding of what DSA is or Zohran and the sewer socialism in a second. But what is appealing to voters, and I think that a lot of people can probably agree with this in this room, even if you didn't vote, is this rhetoric of affordability. When we talk about what the platform is, we're saying that on two assumptions here, especially for people who are hoping to vote or who are trying to contact. One is that, especially if you're from the Bronx or Queens or Brooklyn, when it comes to the left, or when it comes to vaguely progressive spaces in general, voting is all people know, and the working class is struggling. Those are two realities that we have. And I think that this is really important because I agree broadly with what I said before, that capitalism is going to try to sabotage both reformist reforms and non-reformist reforms. And I can get to a bit into a second about what that means, specifically for Zohran, but also organizing in general on the left. But more importantly, we're seeing just the complete collapse of basic quality of life in New York. Like private equity owns everything. Like, I don't know if you guys know, like Partiful has like a Palantir exec as like the CEO of Partiful. They're stealing your information, don't use Partiful. Shameless plug. My friend made an alternative. I don't remember the name though. But the other thing here is that, and what's really important, what I think is very ideological, is especially when it comes to the DSA, and I'm not here to launch like a full-throated defense of the DSA or even Zohran, and I'm going to get into that more again in a bit, is what it means to actually activate somebody or build class consciousness. Because the fact is that I personally will say accelerationism doesn't work. We listed out, sorry, what was your name again?
Dan.
Dan listed out the 10 pivotal, like, I guess, like crises in the last like 50 years, all of which were capitalized by people who were often accelerationists, who said, oh, like COVID is going to make it so that we have like some kind of like groundswelling movement. The Black Lives Matter movement is going to be a groundswelling movement where we see like large amounts of like resistance and direct action. And that didn't work because people, especially for example, under the pandemic, were struggling. They couldn't get organized. And it was honestly just, I would just say it's a very disorganizing space in general. When your conditions are poor, but too poor to the point where you are not able to get organized or even like have collective buy-in in the heart of empire, makes it so that we can't get organized and we can't actually build powerful resistance. Whether that is, and again, I keep saying I'll get to it in a second, whether it is a party or a proto-party formation, or it's actually organizing around identity-based issues, issue-based campaigns, whatever it may be. I give that preface to then talk about first, like this idea of sewer socialism. I want to go down like the questions, because I think they are kind of directed towards both what I am trying to propose, which is, and I'll lay it out, I think that Zohran is not bringing about the revolution, nor do I think Zohran is actually a socialist. I, for example, worked for Zohran. I was the Bronx and Upper Manhattan field coordinator, and I did the work that was, one, targeting who we're doing outreach to in the Bronx and Harlem and Washington Heights and Inwood, and two, doing all the like Latino translation. And I say this because when we talk about this idea of sewer socialism, what Zohran is often trying to say is not that sewer socialists or the LaGuardia was like the best mayor ever to live, even though, you know, sometimes like he's kind of like playing it up for the libs on the Upper West Side. It's the fact that when we talk about making the roads like, you know, smooth, making sure that the subway is clean, making sure that people who are experiencing mental health crises are like getting the help that they deserve, is to improve the quality of life so people can start thinking about what is beyond just their exploitation and what is beyond potentially this very like weird form of like ever de-evolving capitalism. So I'm gonna lay the groundwork then for what I'm proposing. The first is that, again, socialism requires class consciousness and thus requires organization. And the second is that when we talk about what Zohran's policies can mean for this, it's that, and I disagree with certain things, right? Especially on the stancing now around policing. I actually helped write the original platform about the community safety, the Directory of Community Safety, no, the Office of Community Safety. And I wrote some of the policy around specifically incarceration and what that means for, what's it called? Solitary confinement, especially around trans folks and people with mental illnesses. Some of that is no longer being talked about on the mainstream. Some of it is not being, at least to my knowledge, like fully implemented. But the point is that when we were talking about alternatives to policing, we were now shifting away from whatever Zohran might say about, oh, the staffing of police, blah, 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 like apologizing because he wants to like abolish SRG. The point is that we're talking about now an understanding of what can be an alternative to the current sit-standing. You went from, I'll start at Giuliani. You went from broken window policing to a continuation of that under Bloomberg, to then de Blasio, literally, and you guys should look it up. It's called NYPD Secret Files. It's a great book. It's about the constant covering up of like actual like complaints of harassment, assault, racial profiling, or whatever under the de Blasio administration, the so-called progressive. But two, a question of what it actually means to have alternatives to policing. And I think that when we talk about the idea of what Zohran is trying to do when it comes to policing or housing, none of these are necessarily revolutionary ideas. A rent freeze, as been mentioned, for example, has been done under de Blasio. But what the point of a lot of these reforms is to prevent the continued acceleration of, one, Black displacement, for example, in Brooklyn, the Bronx, or two, actually making sure that we can have viable organizing fronts where we are able to not have continued repression. And I say this, and I might be looking at some of your faces, oh, isn't that the same rhetoric that we used for Kamala Harris? I will say yes, but I think it's actually applicable this time. Because the point is that when we have someone like Zohran, he's actively working with organizations, even just the random liberal nonprofits like Make the Road, Communities for Change, that do direct outreach and are actively going to be working with the administration to do everything from like legal assistance for undocumented folks, or just being able to like actually have stronger unions and advocating, for example, for the abolishment of Taylor's Law, so we can let nurses on strike. We can actually have better working class power. Let's go on now to like the electoral project, because I see this as kind of like this question of an audition for a new Democratic Party as something that I want to push back on. I think that I have my opinion, and then Zohran and like the new transition team have their own as to how they want to approach Democratic Party. I have a few criticisms, especially on the continued, I guess, abdication of accepting endorsements of saying, yes, like I'm willing to work with Hochul, whatever, going forward, even though the current Speaker of the State Assembly and the Speaker of the Senate, who are the ones who are supposed to pass the agenda, are now agreeing to all of Zohran's demands. That aside, again, I want to emphasize that the point is not revolution. And I say this not as someone who does not agree with, I ultimately believe that a revolution is necessary in the United States. But I think that the project of DSA and DSA's electoral project is not revolutionary. And I think that if somebody's willing to accept that, then we get into the actual meat of the discussion. If the project is not revolutionary, then what is the point of the project? And the point of the project is then to have better conditions that are currently in the short term for the working class, and two, to allow for other proto-party formations to build, whether it's, I don't think it'll be DSA, but whether it is DSA or whether it's any other group that is able to actually build enough solidarity within labor unions, within local community groups, within helping support mutual aid resistance and stuff like that, or even just like actual direct action that can be expanded upon in the future. And the second is a question of like what we should normalize. And I'll talk a little bit about Lenin here. I really love there was a circulating snippet of something regarding assassination from a week or two ago, which was mainly just a question of like, what does direct action mean and what does individualistic opportunism mean? And I think when we talk about how we want to build up solidarity, what we like to build up community, what we want to build up power, it necessarily means engaging with your neighbors. And this is a question that I want to go into now, which is, and again, I'm going to ask for a quick raise of hands here, is who here like can actively talk to most of their neighbors if you live in an apartment building? I mean, which one of you guys would call yourselves an organizer? Not a community organizer, but just somebody who's willing to like take up. Awesome, I love you. What's your name?
Howard.
Howard, I love you, Howard.
Okay, I love you too, even though I don't know you.
But the question here is, there needs to be a space in which we're able to have better platforms and better grounding for how we're able to build up either a tenants association, a union in your workplace, or whatever. And that often requires, and is often just easier with some non-reformist reforms. And I'm here to kind of not launch a defense of, and I'll get to now the Second International comments that were spent on, but I will never decry purity tests. I want to hold Zohran accountable. I work to get him elected because I think that it's probably the best option that was there in terms of actually being able to lay the groundwork for future organizing, for future, building of unions, of tenant associations, or whatever. But it's not necessarily a question of whether Zohran is going to lead the revolution. And in fact, I'll be honest, I think he's a little egotistical. Like, we probably know all politicians are a little weird, love the spotlight, whatever. But if the work is being done to be able to actually defend some organizing capacity, I think it's something that like is willing to be put some commitment to. Now, do I think that the cult of personality that's been created around Zohran is good, or that we should be having these like fan cam edits of like all like the liberal like high school students who are like, oh man, I love Zohran now, I'm going to intern for him? No, and I think that's a natural byproduct of the current Democratic Party that we have, and it's something that should be pushed back on in future elections. That being said, I will say, when it comes to actually, creating like, I guess, organizing spaces, I want to talk about DSA really quick, and then I'm going to talk about results. The question of like, has DSA rejected this history of like, pro-war like sentiments? I'd say like, obviously, like we're not asking the Republican Party if they're still like, abolitionists, right? Like the question is like, parties change or proto-parties change, whatever you want to say. They like, the Democratic Party is still racist, but like they're not like pro like Southern like pride racist. But I wonder if doing this goes back to a question of what the necessity of the party backing Zohran is. And I think for DSA, it was just the ground movement. It was the ability to mobilize people who only know electoralism and at least introduce them to other forms of organizing. I can say personally, when I talk about DSA, the volunteers that I've met who are from DSA were eventually plugged into other organizing, whether it's, a lot of them are starting to actually look into union organizing, to unionize their workplaces. Many of them actually work at Starbucks and they're unionizing their Starbuckses. There's a big day of action on Thursday that people are trying to get people out to, whether it's our YDSA or whether it's just like random stores. And Starbucks has retaliated, obviously. They've shut down, like now they're planning to shut down 50 stores by Sunday. But it's these organizing conditions that show that when we don't have a strong enough, strong enough built groundwork for where we're trying to organize and how we're trying to actually build up this local power, we're not able to build it up into a scale that is into a mass scale that is actually actionable. And I'm thinking about action here when it comes to like how Zohran will respond to. I have 4 minutes. Yeah. I'm thinking about this in terms of like how we can talk about action. I think we're talking about Zohran in a very big vacuum here. We're talking about Zohran against the world, or we're talking about Zohran as like, this like actor who is going to be highlighted as like the focal point of what like the left can be in the United States. And when I think that's true in a mild media sense, I think we forget that like, for example, a lot of the agenda has to come through the State House. Like I mentioned before, a lot of the State Assembly members are for Zohran's agenda now. They've agreed to tax the rich. And I don't think taxing the rich is socialism, again, I have to constantly repeat it. But the point is that with each movement, whether we see with the Squad in 2018 or we see in BLM, there is a popular uprising that happens that has to be capitalized upon. And I think we are still in the moment where we can still capitalize upon this moment going forward. Whether that's mobilizing the people who were just volunteers for Zohran, whether that's actually radicalizing them to become socialists or communists or what have you, or it's to create revolutionary sentiments that don't dismiss voices. Because I'm going to push back a little here. I do want clarification on what this question of like Israel and fascism was. Because I think like when we talk about just mass work, we're going to have disagreements, but I also think it needs to be in a space where it's one, accessible, and two, actually incorporating the people who are being affected by this. And this is going to be the last thing I'm going to talk about, which is the results. I asked for hands raised of who here is from New York. I assume none of you are from the Bronx. The Bronx is the one spot that was a Democratic holdout that Zohran lost. But I want to clarify something here. Zohran won white voters, Zohran won Asian voters, and he won Hispanic voters. In Harlem, he won by 10 points, which is about 20%, sorry. So that's like 40% to 60%. When we talk about East Queens, East Brooklyn, those are majority Black, majority Indo-Caribbean, Caribbean districts that where we canvassed and where the actual idea of a rent freeze of 3 buses were espoused, Zohran won. We didn't canvass much in the Bronx, and I unfortunately couldn't canvass much in the Bronx because we didn't have volunteers in the Bronx. But in the areas that we did canvass, along Gun Hill or along Fordham, those were areas that we won, and we won among young Black voters, many of whom are from New York. And so I find this interesting when we talk about, is this the class that Harris lost, whether it's the middle class or the lower class, or the working class, more importantly? I would say yes, but I also think it's a question of what the Democratic Party is. The Democratic Party is asking for holdouts from its base support. And Zohran was able to not only win some people from those demographics, but then everyone else in the Democratic Party. And so I will accept this criticism, like in the general, if Zohran loses all working class Black voters, but I don't think that's going to happen. And more importantly, I think when we talk about how the party, quote unquote, or how the coalition, whether DSA or the progressive movement behind Zohran can actually work, it's a question of how can we actually mobilize the voters that one, did not vote, or the people who one, did not vote, or two, who did vote, but are still skeptical of project of what Zohran can be. And I don't think Zohran's going to be a socialist project, but I think it's the capacity, it builds the capacity to have a socialist project in the future in a mass scale. And it's one that can actually lead to, whether it's a strike, hopefully, general in 2028 across the country, or it's an actual revolution that will take probably years or decades to complete, because we haven't fully radicalized the people who are either not on board with Zohran or who are on board with them, but are frankly just liberals.
Melvyn, Professor Dubofsky, we would love to hear your remarks now. I'm going to mute our mic just so that it's easier for people to hear you.
Maybe I should throw a little historical cold water on this discussion.
Professor, I'm sorry, could you stop for just one moment, Art? I'm so sorry.
Era in which municipal socialism actually existed and worked was in a very, very different age. Before World War I, there were over 1,000 cities in the US that had fully or partially socialist municipal administrations. The most famous case being Milwaukee. New York City had a powerful socialist movement, but all this was linked to what amounted to a rising labor movement. Milwaukee socialism was based on Milwaukee unions. In New York, the socialism largely derived from the garment workers' unions, which were openly and declaredly socialist. And in the pre-World War I period, socialism seemed to be on the rise. What is it, 7 decades ago now, when I was doing research at the old Tamiment Library, which was not at NYU. It was at the Rand School of Social Science, 7 East 15th Street. When you walked in, there was a bust of Karl Marx, Morris Hillquit, who ran for the mayor of New York on the Socialist Party ticket, Maya London, socialist congressman from New York. And we found hidden in the masonry the records of Branch 1 of the New York City Socialist Party. I was a young graduate student then. I was just amazed when I saw the membership record of Branch 1 of the New York City Socialist Party. It included almost every prominent artist, literary figure, the intellectual elite. And then in a very strange circumstance, I found 3 letters of resignation from the party clipped together. I don't know who had this particular sense of history, but the 3 resignations clipped together were Walter Lippmann, later a famous journalist, W.E.B. Du Bois, the most prominent African-American or black intellectual leader of his era, and Francis Perkins, who later became Franklin Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor. The Socialist Party, before World War I, was really an integral part of U.S. politics. In the Socialist Party papers, I found letters from prominent Republicans and Democrats crediting the socialists with making major improvements. World War I and the Bolshevik Revolution ripped that apart. Socialism in the US never recovered from the impact of the war and the Bolshevik Revolution that in effect split the left. Milwaukee, Reading, Pennsylvania, Bridgeport, Connecticut, all remained socialist cities in the 20s and the 30s, into the 40s and 50s. Milwaukee, from the time the socialists took over the city into the 50s, built a reputation as the healthiest city in the country. It provided medical care and services for its poorer citizens. It offered, this goes back to pre-World War I, inoculations and milk for its children. It built a marvelous park system. Socialism could offer particular benefits. But socialism in a single city could not change the larger environment. New York City, from the 1930s through the 50s, in a way repeated what Milwaukee did. Fiorello LaGuardia, the mayor in the 30s and 40s, came out of the New York City labor and socialist milieu of the pre-World War I period. And what he did, but he could only do it because New Deal Democrats were in power in Washington, was to take advantage of the money that the Roosevelt administration poured into the city. And with Robert Moses, his master builder, they put beautiful parks throughout the city in working class neighborhoods. I grew up in that city. Two of the municipal colleges were direct beneficiaries of the New Deal and LaGuardia, Brooklyn College and Queens College, both built with New Deal money. New York built municipal housing that worked. The projects originally had a majority white residential population, mostly fully employed workers. It was a great improvement in their living conditions. And then during and after World War II, we had what economic historians call the Great Contraction, when inequality reached what could be called its lowest point. It was a period in which 1/3 of the labor force was unionized. And that 1/3 unionized enabled enormous numbers of non-union workers to receive the same benefits. It was a remarkable period, a period that I grew up in. I mean, it seems inconceivable today. You could walk to a municipal park that had a beautiful baseball field, basketball courts, softball field, enormous swimming pool, diving pool, in a working class neighborhood. For 5 cents, you could ride the subway. For 25 cents, with your high school GO card, you could walk into Madison Square Garden. It was on 8th Avenue between 49th and 50th Street back then, and see a professional basketball or hockey game. Lord, you can turn up the same day at the old Polo Grounds. No luxury boxes in those days, and see the New York football giants play. It does a different city than today. As the historian of that city, Josh Freeman, has noted, it was basically a form of municipal socialism. Nothing like today. I suspect that Mamdani will win the election, but he will not be a LaGuardia. LaGuardia would not have been who he was without the New Deal in power in Washington. I really don't know what Mamdani can accomplish when there will be no support from Trump's Washington. It's going to be extremely difficult. Just 30, 40 years ago, unions were stronger. They had money. Look at some of the great housing in the city. The coops in the Bronx, and also the amalgamated houses in the Bronx. Penn South in Manhattan. I forget the specific name of the development on the Lower East Side. Huge development in Brighton Beach, in Brooklyn, all built largely with union money. It's not available today. It's just a different world. And I look elsewhere, and it seems equally bleak. Back in the 1980s, I was involved in a joint US Soviet academic exchange program. Soviets came here 3 times. We went there 3 times. The first 2 times we went there, 81 and 87. No, 81 and 85. It was bleak. We met nothing but apparatchiks. The last time, 87, it was post-Gorbachev. It was literally a new world. And the amazing thing is, what the Gorbachev people wanted to do in the Soviet Union was to recreate what the French call the glorious 30 years, 45 to 75. They wanted to build a form of Soviet, I don't know how else to put it, social democracy. And the failure of Gorbachev was a great tragedy. I don't know where we go from Mamdani's likely victory in November to the future. And I do not really believe that workers without a college education are necessarily conservative voters. I think the problem basically is few of them are in unions today. New York has more proportionately union members than most places, but it's still a relatively small minority. And it's basically public employees. Take away the teachers, take away the municipal employees, and how many union members still exist in the city of New York? And without unions to have educational and political programs, workers drift politically and are isolated. Organize them, and things change. But it's difficult to organize today because fundamentally the law as it exists and it functions undermines unions. So I don't know where you go from one social democrat in power in one city. As Trotsky used to argue, you could not have socialism or communism in one country. You had to have a global revolution. I don't think that socialism can survive in one city on its own. I hate to throw all this cold water on it, but then I've lived too long, so I don't have much of a future.
Thank you, Professor. Okay, now we'll let the panelists do short responses to each other, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
The question that I was hoping to address, and maybe they come through too clearly, is how do we get strong enough to be able to do any of these things that are under attack? And that's why I'm saying structurally it has to start now. We have to start building it now. We have to start raising all the different kinds of issues, like environmental issues, no pesticides, no GMOs, no gain of function research, no corporate pollution and dumping. All those have to be, and we have to build. I'm part of a group called the No Spray Coalition against the spraying of New York City, and which was for West Nile virus supposedly. And how do those happen under attack from yes fascists and yes Trump and yes others in Israel? How do we do that so that we can build that core now so that can resist the attacks that are coming? And focus on the corporate structure, and focus on the capitalist structure, and go after the banks. And can Zohran or any one individual do that, or can they help facilitate that now when it's needed now, not tomorrow? There is no tomorrow. We're all, there's only now. And we have to start figuring out how to get Zohran and others to put that together. And as an individual, he's not able to do it. It's not a personal attack on him at all. I kind of like him. It means that he has to have something beyond the social democracy of the Second International to understand how to do these things today. And that's where we come in. So I ask you, so please answer that question. Thanks.
So no gain of function research?
Absolutely.
So you're joining the anti-science bandwagon of the Trump administration?
Absolutely.
And you want to build a socialist movement?
Right. They're not the only ones.
Okay, anyway. I'm the only optimist in this table. I think that actually America, there are very interesting things happening here. And I think that there is actually a great revolutionary potential. America has a 238-year-old constitution, which is in absolute ruins. It's being overturned, what little is left of it. It's completely dysfunctional. That is why Trump is in power, because we've had 30 years of gridlock. We've got a Senate which is grotesquely imbalanced. We've got a gerrymandered House. We've got a Supreme Court which is both super reactionary and absolutely unchangeable. With the present lineup, will continue well into the 2030s. We've got an electoral college which is geared very heavily to white rural states, and that's going to change. I think the system is falling apart. I think that that at a certain point will come when America will have to reconstitute itself, throw out this 18th century constitution, and that will be a revolutionary act. Essentially, America will be where France was in 1789, or where Russia was in 1917 when they convened a constituent assembly. So America is facing a huge period of very fundamental change, either dictatorship under Trump or revolutionary reconstitution by the working class. And I think that when the global hegemon reaches this kind of point, that I think that actually the options are wide open. Things look very grim, very discouraging now. Options seem to be very, very limited, but that can change very dramatically. 1789, 1917, and the 2020s. America is a country at an absolute impasse, and impasses don't last forever. They can be shattered, and when they are shattered, extraordinary things can happen. So actually, in contrast to Professor Dubofsky, I actually am very excited about the radical prospects that could conceivably, if you use your imagination, open up in the coming period. I think that Mamdani is a very small diversion in this whole process, but I think that that we could be on the verge of really titanic changes.
I think there's two things here. The first one is just like, how do we organize like short term? And then this question of optimism, and I think radical optimism. I want to start with the second one because I think optimism is different than understanding that currently our organizing base is wholly unprepared for any type of monumental change. We see that in LA, right? Where there was resistance, there was a necessary groundswell, but the National Guard still came in. The governor and the mayor didn't do anything. And there wasn't anything productive to come out of it. There was no long-term or even short-term base building that came out of it, apart from actual direct action resistance, which I think is good and I think was necessary. And it's much better done in LA than we've seen in DC, for example. But I think that shows that the question of how we are prepared, either as socialists or even just in the broad progressive movement that we hope will ally with us, means that we are very unprepared. And I think this is what I was trying to allude to when it comes to the short-term organizing. Because when conditions are a little bit better, it's easier to organize folks. It's easier to actually mobilize people around and actually politicize them. But more importantly, when we talk about short-term organizing goals, I think about stuff like the climate. We see in New York, for example, that a lot of the current climate / understanding of how we're supposed to fight back against the impending climate crisis is either one, very small and on the ground with Planet Over Profit, Fridays for the Future, Our Revolution, those groups that are doing a lot of direct action or defacing Apple or whatever. And it's bringing attention to the issue, but it's not actually mobilizing anybody at a larger scale. And then we have the broader liberal 15 watt Public Renewables Act. And I think it shows that one, that there's still this disconnect between our organizing on the ground and actually building up larger scales of resistance or resilience in general, because the climate crisis is going to happen. We're going to, New York City is infrastructurally a little bit screwed. And so I just am interested in actually what other folks eventually might say about how they kind of envision this longer term organizing and actually developing hard skills among organizers and then actually politicizing people. Because from what I've been hearing right now, I hear revolutionary optimism that something will happen and that we're going to be prepared. And then, unfortunately, which is true, I think, a broader like question of like how will Zohran impact it, away from the organizers, away from how we're able to like build up power, which I also agree is true, but I'm not seeing like tangible alternatives, and I think that that's very telling of how our organizing movement is currently fractured.
I feel like we're having a back against the spine, but I guess I won't.
Thanks, Sebastian. Professor Dubofsky, do you want to respond to any of the panelists? Melvyn, would you like to respond to anything the panelists said?
Well, I'm not sure of what their actual position is. Things are bad, and it's hard to see the promise of something much better on the horizon. And I don't mean to say the worse, the better. I don't think that's ever worked for the better. And the biggest impetus for change the last 2 centuries has been war. And I don't think we want war in the future. Things have simply gotten much worse. What is it now? 30, 50 years ago, I spent a year in Israel teaching. The kind of reality that exists there today was not there 50 years ago. Netanyahu comes from what 50 years ago was the minority sector of Likud. To put it as bluntly as possible, he comes out of a fascist tradition. That was a small minority in Israel 50 years ago. Today, in some respects, it's dominant, and we can all see the results. I guess I've just lived too long. And not ready to end my days with a Trumpian nation. I'd like to be more positive, but it's hard.
Thanks, Melvyn. We're going to open it up now to questions from the audience. Okay, we're going to go here and then here. But can somebody help me pass this out? Yeah, thanks, Athena. And you're going to have to take it back because awesome.
Over there first, Athena. Yeah, and then Joe.
I don't really have a question, just wanted to say a few things. I'm a reader of Workers' Vanguard and Spartacist. There's a caucus in the DSA right now called the Just Break Already that's calling for a clean break now. And I think that's sort of the one way you really need to look at the Mamdani and candidacy. Now, I'm sorry, you're with the YDSA. What's your name? Okay, so you say he's not a socialist, so why don't you throw him out of the DSA, you know? And like, as far as Professor Cohen's question, it's still August 4th for the DSA, for the Second International, you know? There's at the last conference, there was a motion to censure AOC because she wasn't, you know, hard enough on Zionism. So what we need is Leninism, Trotskyism, you know, left-wing communism. I recommend everyone read that book. And like the Trotskyists in the USA, they're entering the Socialist Party. That's sort of what the JBA is doing in the DSA. We have to remove the obstacles to the working class achieving consciousness of the need to take state power. So Dan made a lot of good points, but it's sort of doing the same mistake that we used to do. You could look at our history, and we've made a lot of reorientations in the last few years. One important one that's very relevant here today is on the Marxist principles and electoral, running for electoral office. So yeah, it's important to take on, you know, backwards ideas that the working class has, and making, you know, so okay, there's a lot of illusions in Mamdani. So what should we say is, you know, make a real break with Zionism, not this like pussyfooting and, you know, denounce it altogether. Break with the Democratic Party. If he wants to stay in the DSA, you know, refuse all funding and make a real break with the Democratic Party. And lastly, the question of the forcible segregation, oppression of Black people. We're in Workers' Vanguard, you can read about the Open the Police Archives campaign. And that's something that we want to hold liberals' feet to the fire with. Basically, like there's a concrete case today in the Bronx that I think you might be interested in. Is the case of Eric Dupre, who was killed by a cop a couple of years ago. And we're mobilizing to, you know, support his family in their struggle for justice. So I'll leave it at that.
Does anybody want to respond? I guess that was kind of directed at Sebastian. Do you want to say anything, Sebastian? Yeah, here you go.
Sorry, I'm just remembering everything you said. There were three questions in there. So I think the first one is, you know, better structure this. I think the first one is on DSA internal politics. I hate DSA internal politics. I hate internal politics in general. I'm not like a partisan person. I'm mainly just like one who, I do a lot of like the hard skills training and like work on the ground a lot. Like I said, mainly with tenants associations and now unions. But I will say, I think the question of JVA or just break already, and then larger questions of internal DSA politics, I think they're separate from like what the Zohran campaign is, for better or worse. But I think that when it comes to DSA, for example, I mean, like, you know, like they've passed like an anti-Zionist resolution. DSA National has unendorsed AOC, unendorsed Jabal Bowman. There's larger questions on like, there's like internal resolutions, I think, on like how to hold Zohran accountable through like a party mechanism. I'm not like super privy to those because I, again, am not like super like involved in like the weeds of, I guess like the accountability mechanisms that DSA wants to implement. But I will say, and I think this regards the second question of like, why run Zohran at all if he's not a socialist? I think I say that in the sense of like, I don't think you can govern as a socialist right now. I kind of agree with the professor on Zoom. I'm sorry, I forgot their name. Melvyn? Yeah. Yes, Professor Melvyn, because I think currently, and I don't think this is a hot take, there is no left wing that's like tangible in the United States at the moment. Like the organizing capacity for a true socialist or communist movement is non-existent in the US. This is why Trump won, because there is no counter, true, like genuine radicalizing counter to the fascistic narratives that are imposed upon the working class, imposed upon young men, blah, 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 alt-right pipeline. We've heard that narrative before. But I think the question of why to run Zohran itself and why I think a large part of, and this was an internal debate, people dissented to endorse DSA and to endorse Zohran and DSA. But it's a question of how we actually can prevent the ever cascading like material conditions of New York City's like working class folks, mainly because of affordability, this rising rent problem. The reason why so many, especially like Latinos and like I think like a lot of South Asian folks voted for Trump. I can say very clearly a lot of my neighbors voted for Trump because of this. Like a lot of them were like, oh, like Trump gave us a stimulus check in 2020. Like he gave us bread. Like we need that money. And it's like, okay, sure, but like that's not the point of why like Trump is giving that like aid out, right? But that requires a lot of like political education. I don't have to necessarily say that out here. But I think I'm trying to answer this question in terms of like running a socialist is different than how they can govern, especially in the context of a fascistic government, in the context of what the actual mechanisms of the mayorship can do, et cetera, et cetera. If anything, I'm more pro, like, if we want to run quote unquote socialists, we see, like, I don't know, people in Cincinnati, I think there's like some like random like self-identified socialists who are out there like trying to actually divert money from the police department. They're out there trying to put in more money into like mental health wraparounds and narco training. Like all that stuff is like questions of like how we actually implement policy rather than like initiating a revolution. And I think that's the clarification I tried to give earlier. The final question on the Bronx. I mean, yeah, I'm from the Bronx. I've heard about this before. I don't know. I don't know what the campaign's doing on that right now. I don't work for the government anymore. I work, but I'll tell people to go.
Sorry, so I'll just ask you quickly. So my question is more of a historical theoretical one, is can Zohran use the state power that if he wins he will have to then build the kind of movement, organizations that we will need? That's a real question. I don't know if you can, but it's historically top down versus bottom up. Can you use state power in order to create a socialist base, or does it happen the other way around?
I think the supporting of a socialist base is different than like the groundswelling that's needed to create it. I do not think that like socialism or like communist movements can emerge because there is like a socialist president or whatever. And also on the policy side, I don't know how many of you know this, New York City is a weak home rule state, or New York is a weak home rule state, which means most of the power belongs to the state government rather than the city government. So the only person with real power is the mayor at the city level, blah, blah, blah. He controls all the budgeting, whatever, which is why Zohran wanted to run for mayor. But at a theoretical level, I think like we see this, that it's probably the case that this can happen with how the mayor and Tammany Hall, for example, very corrupt, of course, but how like the mayor and Tammany Hall back almost a century ago were able to, at the very least, create the propping up of like ethnic enclaves in New York City. We saw that especially, there's a great book, How to Be the Mayor of New York. It's really interesting because it's not a politicization of like working class communities in New York City, but it is, it does demonstrate how the coalitions that back someone in power in New York City or the mayor or whoever can effectively help push working class folks towards unions, towards more, I guess, like stronger community ties, tenants associations, stuff like that. And I think with the proper politicization from organizers and people from like proto-party formations, it's possible, I think, to at least start building that groundwork, because I don't think we've seen it yet.
But Sebastian, you're contradicting yourself. I mean, you said that Mamdani is not a socialist. So how will electing a non-socialist build socialism? It doesn't seem to add up.
So I said that he is a socialist, definitely, like him personally. Like if you hear the comments he's made like in 2020 and before. But I said specifically being able to govern as a socialist. And I think that you can create, you can use the power of the mayor to have like these non-reformist reforms to create like a better ability to have like conditions for organizing, whether it's, again, tenants associations, unions, whatever, that are necessary, or even just like not cracking down on like protests, right? And like actually helping like radicalize folks. I don't think that there is like some kind of, what's the word? Like, I don't think there's some like very like at the philosophical level, I don't think there's like a difference in like how socialists and non-socialists can interact at the ground level. I think a lot of that is just propaganda and messaging. And so I think that like, even if you aren't able to govern and your policies are explicitly socialist in nature, and I'd ask you to honestly clarify what that means if I didn't have to run out if you're assuming. Like, I think you can do that without like being in office and being like, I'm a communist, like I'm calling for a revolution right now.
Socialist or not?
I said he is personally a socialist.
What you said before,
I said he can't govern as a socialist. I clarified afterward.
I'm very confused as to what that means. I mean, it seems to me that that Mamdani, if he was a socialist, would be mobilizing the working class against the impending Trump assault, right? Because if Mamdani is elected, Trump's going to come down on New York like a ton of bricks, and he'd be mobilizing the working class to fight that off. He's not. He is conferring with Kathy Hochul instead. He's seeking her support.
He didn't seek her support. She endorsed it after Carlton Steve and Andrew Steve President endorsed it.
Okay. Anyway, so he's not mobilizing the working class.
Endorsement for the lobby who's in challenge. A lot of these questions are policy questions and political questions. I don't think ideological questions.
But they are, of course, ideological. Everything's an
No,
ideological
but strictly
question.
ideological. Like, if you're just talking about like how she stays in power, which I guess is liberal.
Melvyn, I was wondering, do you want to come in on this question at all of the state and, you know, whether it is that socialism arises first in society or whether you have kind of a socialist mayor that supports the development of a socialist movement? And, you know, the relationship that was drawn to Tammany Hall and the Democratic Party of the 19th century.
Well, I don't think you can create socialism from the top down. It's reciprocal. You have to have a base below as well. And the two, the base, call it the superstructure you want, have to interact and build each other up. In the early 20th century, it was local socialist groupings and trade unions that built up the strength of socialism. It did not arise from officials being elected here or there and building a following. It came mostly from below. But when the forces below put leaders into power, those leaders had to work to try to enlarge the mass below. We're in a very different situation today. And I don't honestly know. I think Mamdani can make improvements in the city, but I don't see how that is going to have much of an impact one way or another on socialism in the larger regional or national sphere.
Thanks, Melvyn. Oh my goodness. I know he's getting an angry letter after this. Okay, we got a lot of questions. Let's get a student, and then we'll go to Jack.
And we'll do both, take both of them.
I guess I was curious about the discussion around like revolutionary optimism and like the potential for change in America and why like the certainty that that's going to be captured by radicals and like the potential like capture of like reactionary wings of like using that to push their own means.
Thanks. I'm going to skip Jack because I know Jack had it too.
Melvyn, I don't know if you could see me. I'm sorry I could meet you in person. I was amazed to hear about it all. My History of the Socialist Party that was published 10 years ago, you read the first draft. You remember?
Oh, he's smiling. You said yes. That's a yes.
I probably did. I probably did. I actually do have a labor history question. You might help me with my current project, but that's not why I'm up now. I guess what I want to say is, first of all, no, the DSA is absolutely not a continuation of the Second International. I know that there are survivors of 70s Maoism who were shocked by the levels of totalitarianism in DSA since 2017. And I mean, what it would really mean to be part of the Second International again, as Platypus argues, the death of the left in 1919 to complete the bourgeois revolution, and which means what I want to say about, I guess I'm in the third camp on revolutionary optimism between Daniel and you, Melvyn, because, you can stop well short of 1789, I certainly hope. You could talk about the implementation of the Fifth Republic in 1958 as how to resolve a constitutional crisis of the kind we may or may not be. Well, the term is overused, but that's beside the point. The point is, what hasn't been said, what Mamdani has already achieved by winning the primary, is that he swept aside the last surviving rickety scaffolding of the pre-Vietnam Democratic Party, of the world of Melvyn's youth that he spoke of so eloquently. And I don't want to go back to that world. There is something entirely new that can be built of a 21st century. Sewer socialism in the 21st century would look very different from sewer socialism in the 20th century. And you mentioned the socialism has to be built from the bottom up and not with the top-down money from the New Deal as you described in the case of LaGuardia. I guess that, and Sebastian left, but to be perfectly frank, the more you get away, the more Zohran gets away from everything he was talking about, that whole list of NGOs he name-checked and the rest, that is all to the good. I guess I might just finally mention as a sidebar about when you got into the exchanges, Zohran a socialist, or the splitting hairs you're having. I don't care really about that question, but when Sebastian said, yes, he's a socialist because of the things he said in 2020, you might recall Melvyn, one of the major themes in my book on the Socialist Party, which, by the way, Sublation Media, closely aligned to Platypus, are putting out a new paperback at the end of this year, but just how embarrassingly ultra-left many of the founders of Cold War liberalism and others like that were at their beginning. And so that is, I think, something very much to be borne in mind as we look to the career beginning of the likely next mayor of New York. Thank you.
So, revolutionary optimism. So we are coming in, we are emerging out of a long, dark winter. There have been periods like this before. 1815 to 48, the 1920s in the US, the 1950s in the US, but this one has lasted a very long time. But clearly, these great structures are cracking. I mean, the constitutional structure of the US, the global hegemony, it has a 238-year-old document, and this is coming apart at the seams. American political institutions are paralyzed. The Republican and Democratic parties have both collapsed. The working class is in play. The working class deserted the Democrats, the traditional party, in 2024, and now Trump is hammering them. And the question is, will the working class now desert Trump? And if it does, where will it go? So I see this ossified structure, which is coming apart. Of course, I don't believe the worst. The worst is better. But I see great opportunities in the breakup of this fossilized structure, which I think creates an opening for independent working class action. Because it's the working class which will have to rebuild this political economic structure and deal with immense, stupefying problems like the climate crisis. But I think that the ice is breaking. These ossified structures are coming apart, and I think that creates opportunities. So that is the source of my optimism.
Let's get another question. We'll do K and J.
Reverse alphabetical order.
So something that hadn't come up too often yet this evening, which surprised me. The only time it sort of came up was in calls for Israel as being fascist or something like that, which I'm not going to get into too much, but it's the pro-Palestinian protests. And at least in my own kind of circle, I saw a lot of people who partook in these protests who are now liquidating themselves into the campaign for Mamdani. And already from the beginning, there was a sort of question of, is this a leftist protest? And if so, how? And a lot of people who attended were sort of in the camp of, okay, this doesn't really have anything to do with leftism, but it's an opportunity to maybe engage people and to have people be interested in socialism and so on. So now, where a year or 2 years later, apparently no one's really talking about the Palestinian question anymore, and people are now backing Mamdani, we now hear that, okay, Mamdani doesn't really have anything to do with socialism. It's really about increasing, bettering the material conditions of workers, and maybe that will then be beneficial to eventually organizing the working class or something like that. And so my question is, maybe a bit provocatively, if it is really about increasing the material conditions of the working class, why shouldn't Mamdani align with Trump and say, okay, look, Trump is building all this wealth. At least he says so. He has a plan to do so. He has a plan to build all this wealth after neoliberalism and in somewhat, maybe we could call it post-neoliberalism or something like that. And why shouldn't, if the goal is to create, to better the conditions, the material conditions of the working class, why wouldn't we then encourage Mamdani to align with Trump and use that, we could maybe say New Deal money or 2025 New Deal money, to then build or rebuild New York and so on.
We'll get Jay and then we'll come back to the panelists.
Hi. I guess what I wanted the group to maybe start thinking about, because I think it was referenced, but kind of elided, is we've been asking ourselves, is Zohran a socialist? Is he slipping from socialism? and I think we've been thinking about what he's not doing. But in thinking of the evidence I have of what he is doing, that is very clear to me as kind of leaving a socialist politics is the question of the police. I think we've been thinking through sewer socialism and its relationship to the Milwaukee Socialist Party. I think the question of the police is very crucial in thinking through both Zohran's kind of working with, facilitation, tacit support of the police, and the Milwaukee Socialist relationship with the police, establishing a new police chieftain, and the ways that that kind of created real problems for that moment. I guess I'll address the trace or ghost of Sebastian on this one. But on the question of something that I noticed in when he was talking is kind of focusing on, oh yes, clearly we're leaving the problem with police, but we're focusing on affordability and the non-reformist reforms and the reformist reforms. I think it treats the police as one amongst a plurality of issues, when really I think the question of the police undergirds like the whole struggle. I think the struggle for social reform will inevitably be a struggle against the police. And I think that if we're starting to think through the ways that Mamdani is leaving a socialist politics, I think it is directly related to the idea that we can be friends with the police and also have our, rent freeze. I think that we have to assert that in order to get our rent freeze, in order to get our free buses, in the same ways that the police intervened in non-police issues in Milwaukee, like their crushing of dance halls, I think that we have to be clear-eyed or just honest about that all of what we want will be a struggle with the police. And so to Sebastian's goes, I want my non-reformist reforms. That will not happen if we play soft with those who protect private property.
No, these are all great points that everybody's making, and I'd rather hear the audience than hear the panel.
First of all, your comments about the Palestinian movement is really amazing. And the Palestinian movement has died, but the war has not stopped. I mean, the devastation in Gaza is intensifying. Netanyahu is moving to the final stage, where he is going to he's literally leveling Gaza City, hurting the entire population to the extreme south, where they will be in concentration camp-like conditions at best, if they aren't actually expelled en masse. And it's heading for the climax, and of course Trump, much to Netanyahu's delight, talks quite freely about a massive ethnic cleansing operation in Gaza. But yet the movement has died. I've written about this for the Platypus Review, and I made myself fairly unpopular by saying that the problem with the movement is it didn't grapple with the Hamas problem. I mean, Hamas is a far right, you can argue over whether to classify it as fascist or not, but it certainly is a far right movement, which the pro-Palestinian movement tried to pretend didn't exist. And the consequences for the movement were disastrous, and they're disastrous for the Palestinian people who are facing the ultimate ruination. Now, I know you're being very provocative about why don't we align with Trump if he's going to really increase I assume that was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but why not? Well, because he's not going to create wealth. I mean, Trump is leading to the accelerating impoverishment of American society. It'll be to the benefit of a tiny, tiny elite, but for the working class, I mean, there's nothing but regression under Trump. Democratically, economically, culturally, medically, you know, and there's, I mean, Trump is a disaster for the workers. So we can't align with Trump. We've clearly got to oppose Trumpism, but we've got to oppose the system that gave rise to Trump. And that's the really important thing. There's nothing to, if you elect Democrats, you know, in 2026 or 2028, we'll just be back to where we were under Biden. And things will fall apart again, and there'll be another Trump waiting in the wings to take over. That will not be a cure. And about the cops, I actually disagree with you. I think the cops are an end of the pipeline problem. I think the structures in America are so profoundly undemocratic and racist that is what generates police brutality, not the reverse.
Is this a response to the conversation happening now or a different question? I saw you just raise your hand because of what they said.
It's not really a direct response. You're taking a different approach in checking.
Maybe we'll just wait 1 second. Oh, are you saying Melvyn, you have to say something? I hate Zoom. Melvyn, if you ever want to say something, you can just start talking and we'll hear you and we'll tell everybody to get quiet.
Just want to leave you with an Antonio Gramsci aphorism.
Wait, you gotta say it one more time. I'm sorry.
I said I want to leave you with an Antonio Gramsci aphorism. Pessimism of the intellect, optimism of the will.
Thanks, Melvyn. I wanted to ask a question while we have you three here that I think it would be a shame if I didn't ask, because it came up in the opening remarks, and I know that all of the students who worked on this panel actually are very interested in the question.
And I do have to leave. It's late.
Melvyn, could I ask you one more question before you leave? Is that all right?
Goodbye.
Okay, goodbye. Goodbye, sir. Okay, well then I guess we only have 2 people left. I feel like I'm in an episode of Seinfeld. Is that what's happening to me right now? Okay, well, thank you everybody for coming out. I think that means that we're going to have to bring this to a close. We're very sorry about all of the technical issues. It's getting harder and tell us the question. The question I was going to ask. Okay, here's the question I was going to ask, which is that I felt like, Mitchell, in your remarks, you had made an argument that we need to go beyond the forms of the Second International, and that the Second International is in part responsible, right, for the DSA that we have today, in large part. Dan, I thought you took kind of a different position, but Melvyn then made almost the reverse argument, it seemed to me, right? He was talking about the fact that there were kind of greater, broader forms of working class organization during the Second International than there have ever been since, and since it split around World War I and the 1917 revolution. And I wanted to ask you guys to talk about that.
Very quickly, the Second International, the SPUSA, had a very spotty at best record on racism. One of the best selling SP pamphlets in the U.S. came out in 1914, and it was a blast against workplace intervention, workplace integration. The pamphlet said it was horrible that bosses were making white and black workers drink from the same ladle, and demanded working class action to stop that. Unions were very widely segregated. Eugene V. Debs was a personally, a very humane individual who wrote very eloquently on the race question. But Debs was, as you know, a pacifist, P-A-S-S-I-V-I-S-T. He did not believe that there was any special role for the SP in combating racism. It's extraordinary. And so we can't romanticize the SP. And it's the failure to deal with that problem, which is eventually led to the destruction of the left. So you can't have this. You can't look back to some golden age. And I think that's one lesson the left has learned. Anyway.
Yeah, thanks. You had exactly characterized my own remarks correctly. The question for the Second International being challenged was on the question of war and the question of all these socialist party leadership honchos going and supporting World War I. And Melvyn said that they were doing that partly because their own membership would have lynched them. Things changed in a matter of weeks, and I would wish he was still here, because things happened over really in a few weeks in August of 1914. And so things don't stay the same in that regard. I wanted to add that one way that we've lost how to argue was what Dan did to me before. When I said no gain of function research, which means no CIA inventing research that goes and is murdering people or devising viruses and using genetic codes inserting them into viruses and playing with that in Fort Detrick. And I've written plenty on that and on other things like that. So when I said that, he said, "Oh, you want to be with Trump?" Like as if that's a welcome response that kind of pathetic arguing is what's destroying and corroding any real discussion here, and in the U.S. and probably elsewhere too, that there really needs to be an apology, and there needs to be people having realized that we have differences of opinion, and let's discuss them rather than to berate a person or castigate them and make fun of them for having a difference of opinion, and that's not going to work.
Are you opposed to genetic research and genetic viral research?
I'm opposed to what you said, how you said it.
Are you opposed to genetic and viral genetic viral research?
No, that's not what gain of function is. Gain of function is the CIA war machine and the U.S. biowarfare labs creating these things that are being used to attack people around the world.
Gain of function research takes place in countless laboratories and universities. Are you arguing against that?
I'm arguing against what you're failing to recognize. Yeah.
In gain of function research by the CIA. So function research for bad purposes, you're saying? I'm sorry.
Yes, I don't want to get into that argument now. I can, but
I mean, I don't know if anybody on this stage actually thinks the most important debate we could be having right now is drawing a red line about gain of function research. But
yeah, Trump's attacking science. This is very important.
What does that have to do with Trump? A lot of people say that, not only Trump.
How they're using science and how corporations and pharmaceutical industries under the guise of science are selling us these drugs, and in some cases, vaccines, even though not anti-vaccine, but they are selling us this conception of health that's really predicated on their profits. And we cannot trust their research results without truly independent people examining that. And we don't have that right now in this country because everyone's kowtowing to the pharmaceutical industry. Robert F. Kennedy, as much as I disagree with his alignment with Trump, has raised some real questions around that. I'm sorry, I have to say that. Even though I also am I would consider myself a socialist. And I also wanted to add that in Chinatown, Lower East Side, where I aligned with the Coalition to Protect Chinatown, Lower East Side, our approach has been around the issues of displacement and workers' rights. And we don't feel Mamdani has been strong enough around those particular concerns. So many people support Mamdani. We're not saying we support any of the other candidates. We're running actually an anti-Cuomo campaign. But our goal is to push Mamdani to take a stronger position on displacement issues. He has not come out against Adams' City of Yes, and he has also not really critiqued the Cuomo, actually the state's vote in 2024 under Hochul for the Affordable Neighborhoods for New Yorkers tax-exempt program, which only calls for 20 to 25% of new development for affordable housing or low and working class housing. So that's been our approach. Displacement, that affects everyone in the low income and working class, communities, as well as workers' rights. So we have a very strong position around that. For those who are interested, we're the Coalition to Protect Chinatown on the Lower East Side. Thanks a lot.
Okay, I think we should draw to a close, but maybe let's try and bring this back to Mamdani with one last question, and I think this relates to gain of function, which is the role of the state, right? What is the role of the state? Should socialists be able to criticize the state? And, Dan, is a certain criticism of the state exempt because Trump is also making that criticism? What would a leftist critique of the state be? Is there one? And how does this relate to Mamdani, who is, I think, pretty frankly and straightforwardly would say that you need the state, and the whole point is to have a big state and a bigger state. So what do socialists make of that? I think that's a good way to round out our panel tonight.
You mean the bourgeois state?
The capitalist state.
Okay, so obviously we want to overthrow the capitalist state. I'm not quite sure what the question is. I mean, we want to replace it with a socialist state, a powerful democratic socialist state, which will mobilize the working class to rebuild their society. I just read a terrific book called Communism and Terrorism by Leon Trotsky, written on the famous train as he was racing from front to front in the Russian Civil War. And he discusses with remarkable frankness the creation of a socialist superstate. Kind of, the state is reaching its crescendo. But certainly, that is the kind of state we've got to build, but it's got to be an absolutely democratic state. A state that is as democratic as it is, sovereign and powerful.
So Dan just said, and I wrote it down, the state will mobilize the working class to...
The workers.
The workers. Right. We just don't agree on that. I think it's the workers ourselves who create the new society, and we need the state under socialists to help facilitate that process where possible, and to help bolster it, create the communication links that are needed. But it's the workers ourselves, and through our actions and through our direct actions, that accomplish the creation of socialism, not the state. And I think we fight against the state, the capitalist state, and the state, fascist state, the state itself as the embodiment of the capitalist class. This is a very good question, and it opens up into a whole new round of stuff. So we'll just let it go on that. But I really appreciate it. I would love to hear more people's points here if we don't have to go I mean, I can stay here and talk to people if you want. I'd love to hear them because people are raising incredible points. And one question on the Palestine, I'm sorry, is, you know, I've been involved, like many of us, for a long time in movements, social movements, that raised the question of Palestine for, I'd say, like 40 years within our different movements, coalitions, anti-war coalitions and stuff, and that they were always ignored or shut down or refused by liberals and other social democrats and also other parties, Marxist parties, even though I'm a Marxist. You know, they were just shut down. And that was a fight that we had every time I'd submit a resolution to, and so it's only now, and I give Mamdani credit for this, I agree, that him raising these issues in New York City are really important. I think that it's incredibly important, just to uphold our moral conscience if nothing else. But you know, can that translate into ongoing activity and ongoing structures? I keep pushing structures. I hate structures, but it's a different kind of state. So if we're talking about the state, it's a state that's built on workers' councils and on communes and on not the state that's legislative top down, and it's just a very different way of seeing things.
Okay, thank you everybody for coming, and thanks to Dan and Mitchell for staying to the end. Thank you. Well, we're gonna go tonight soon. I think for those who want to keep talking, we are going to go somewhere, hopefully with food, but which college students can enter without being bounced. Athene, do you know any place near? Where should we go?
I'll think of a place that's nearby, but there's probably like there's that pizza place. Yeah, I'll look into a place.
Okay, we'll meet downstairs and then we'll walk somewhere to eat. So if you want to eat and drink and be merry, come with us. But thank you, everyone. And if you're interested in Platypus at NYU, please get in touch with Natalie. And we're going to be doing more panels this semester. We're going to have one on the Iranian Revolution at Columbia, and hopefully another panel on Mamdani at Columbia. Thanks.
I wanted to say, I have a